The polished mahogany door of the design studio closes behind my 22-year-old protege, Leo, and the two venture capitalists he just introduced as his new partners. Through the glass, I watch him gesture at the mood boards covering my walls, my concepts, my life's work. He catches me staring and gives a small, apologetic shrug before turning the lock. I pull out my phone and dial the one person who can still help me burn it all down. If you want to see how this plays out, hit that subscribe button right now. The morning light slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, casting long shadows across the drafting table where I'd spent the better part of 40 years hunched over blueprints and pencil sketches. At 72, Richard Marlowe still arrived before anyone else, still made his own coffee in the battered Chemex that had survived 3 office moves, still walked the empty halls of Marlowe and Associates with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built something from nothing. The firm occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse in the Old Mill District, a testament to the urban renewal projects I'd consulted on in the early 2000s. Exposed brick, steel beams, the original hardwood floors sanded and sealed, but deliberately left imperfect. I'd designed the space myself back when my hands could still manage the detailed renderings without cramping by midday. Now I relied on younger architects to translate my vision into digital models, but the bones of the place were pure Marlowe. I settled into my chair, the leather creaking in welcome, and pulled the morning reports from the printer. The Portland International Airport expansion, the single largest commission in the firm's history, was entering its final design phase. 3 years of work, countless meetings with the Port Authority, hundreds of thousands of dollars in billable hours, and sitting at the top of the distribution list above my name was Leo Braddock's. My protege, my successor, the boy I'd plucked from a graduate thesis presentation at the University of Oregon 7 years ago and molded into the firm's rising star. Leo had that rare combination of technical precision and conceptual boldness that reminded me of myself at his age. 29 now, with the kind of confidence that only came from never having a project fail because someone else always caught the mistakes before they went to the client. I'd been that someone. For 7 years, I'd been that someone. The office door opened behind me, and I didn't need to turn around to know it was Sarah Chen, my executive assistant of 15 years. She set a mug of fresh coffee on my desk, the good stuff from the roaster across the street, and lingered a moment longer than usual. Richard, the Port Authority meeting was moved up. It's today at 2, not tomorrow. I glanced at my calendar. Empty, as usual. Leo handled all the client presentations now. The official reason was succession planning, preparing the next generation to take the reins. The unofficial truth was that clients wanted to see the person who would actually be managing their projects. And at 72, I was no longer that person. I understood the logic, even if it sat uneasily in my chest. Leo knows? Sarah nodded. He's already confirmed with the client. He asked if you could join via video call. Via video call, from my own office, 3 floors above, where the meeting would happen. I sipped the coffee and said nothing. By noon, the office had filled with the familiar rhythms of creative chaos. Junior architects clustered around pinup boards, debating material specifications. The receptionist fielded calls from contractors and suppliers. Somewhere down the hall, a 3D printer hummed through another iteration of the terminal's facade model. I walked the perimeter of my domain like a general surveying troops who no longer needed his commands. Leo's office door was open, and I could see him through the glass, head bent over his tablet, earbuds in, completely absorbed. On his wall hung a framed sketch I'd given him after his first major project, a mixed-use development on the east waterfront. My handwriting in the corner, to Leo, who already sees what I spent decades learning. I'd meant it as encouragement. Now it felt like prophecy. I knocked on the door frame and Leo looked up, pulling out an earbud with the practiced smile he'd perfected for clients. Richard, hey, you get the meeting update? Sarah told me, you're prepared? Leo leaned back, crossing his arms behind his head in a gesture I recognized as my own. Completely. The revised traffic flow studies came back yesterday, and I've integrated them into the presentation. The Port Authority's main concern was pedestrian connectivity to the MAX line, So I've emphasized the new Concord solid, but I'll CC you on the recap email. Partners, he meant the two junior associates I'd promoted last year, both under 35, both fiercely loyal to Leo. I nodded and walked away, the floor seeming longer than it had that morning. Back in my office, I pulled up the project files and started scrolling through the presentation Leo had uploaded to the shared drive. The slides were beautiful, clean, persuasive. My foundational concepts were there, buried beneath layers of refinement that Leo and his team had added. But as I dug deeper into the appendices, something caught my attention. A staffing chart for the post-design phase, the construction administration period that would span the next 4 years. My name appeared under Founding Principal Emeritus, a title I'd never heard before, with no assigned hours or responsibilities. Leo's name was under Lead Architect, with a full-time commitment and direct reporting line to the client. Below him, the two junior partners filled out the management team. I scrolled back to the project timeline, checking dates. The final design approval was scheduled for next month. After that, the project would move into construction documentation, then bidding, then groundbreaking. Nowhere in that timeline was there a role for me. I closed the file and stared out the window at the river below. The water moved the same way it had when I'd first seen this view 30 years ago, before the warehouse conversion, before the firm's expansion, before Leo. I'd built this place on the strength of my reputation, my relationships, my willingness to work 80-hour weeks while my marriage crumbled and my daughter moved across the country to escape the shadow of my ambition. And now, at the moment when the largest project of my career was about to break ground, I was being phased out with a courtesy title and no responsibilities. The door opened again, and this time it was Leo. He stood in the doorway with the same apologetic expression I'd seen him use when delivering bad news to clients. "Richard, I wanted to talk to you before the meeting about the staffing structure." I turned from the window. I saw it, Emeritus. Leo stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "It's not what you think. The Port Authority wants a younger leadership team for the long-term commitment. They're worried about continuity, given your age, but your vision is still the foundation of everything. We're just implementing." I studied his face, looking for the boy who'd sat in my office 7 years ago, nervous and brilliant, asking if I'd consider mentoring him. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who'd learned my lessons too well. "And the emeritus title?" Leo spread his hands. "It's honorary. You'll still be involved in high-level strategy, client relationships when needed. But day-to-day management needs to be with the team who'll see this through to completion. The team he'd built, the team that reported to him, the team that would forget my name within a year of the ribbon cutting." "I understand," I said. "Let's discuss it after the meeting." Leo nodded, relieved, and slipped back out. I sat down heavily and pulled up the original partnership agreement I drafted when I incorporated the firm 40 years ago. Revised countless times since, but the core provisions remained. One clause in particular, buried in the dissolution section, had seemed theoretical when I'd written it. A mechanism for situations where a principal's continued involvement became detrimental to the firm's interests. I'd included it as standard boilerplate, never imagining I'd need to use it against someone I'd trained. But the language was broad, and the definition of detrimental was subject to interpretation. If I could demonstrate that Leo was systematically excluding me from projects I'd originated, that he was positioning himself as the sole creative force behind the firm's largest commission, I could trigger a review process that would freeze all progress until resolved. The airport project would stall. The Port Authority would panic. The partners would have to choose between me and Leo, and I knew with the cold clarity that had made me successful that they would choose the project, which meant they would have to keep me involved. It was nuclear option, the kind of move that would poison everything I'd built, but it would prevent Leo from taking what was mine without a fight. I saved the document and closed my laptop. At 2 o'clock, I dialed into the video call and watched Leo present my work to the client, never once mentioning my name. The video call ended with handshakes and congratulations. The Port Authority team clearly thrilled with the presentation. Leo had that effect on people. He made them feel like partners in creation rather than clients purchasing a service. I taught him that too, the art of making the customer believe your ideas were actually theirs, gently guided toward architectural expression. Watching him work was like watching a younger, more polished version of myself, and I wasn't sure anymore whether that filled me with pride or dread. I clicked off the call and sat in the sudden silence of my office, the afternoon sun now harsh and revealing across my drafting table. The napkin sketch of the concourse design, the one I'd drawn on that site visit, was still pinned to the corkboard above my desk. I'd kept it as a reminder of those moments when inspiration struck unbidden, when the solution appeared fully formed before the rational mind could interfere. Now it looked like a relic, a artifact from a time when my hands still mattered. Down the hall, I could hear the celebration starting. Leo's voice raised in good-natured triumph, the junior partners laughing, someone popping a bottle of something, probably the good champagne I kept in the conference room fridge for client closings. I wasn't invited. That much was clear. I was the emeritus, the figurehead, the man whose name was still on the door, but whose presence was no longer required for the rituals of success. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who might understand. My daughter Elena answered on the third ring, her voice cautious the way it always was when I called unprompted. "Dad, everything okay?" "Fine," I said too quickly. "Just thinking about the airport project. It's moving forward." A pause. "That's good, right? The biggest commission you've ever had?" "Yes, good." Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" "Of course, no rush." She hung up and I was alone again, with the sound of celebration drifting through the walls. I'd raised Elena in this business in a way, brought her to site visits when she was small, let her play with scale models while I negotiated with contractors. But somewhere around her teenage years, the distance had grown. She'd watched my marriage to her mother dissolve under the weight of my ambition, watched me choose the firm over family again and again until there was no family left to choose. By the time she graduated college, she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with architecture or the man who'd sacrificed everything for it. We'd rebuilt something in recent years, a fragile bridge of occasional phone calls and holiday visits. But the foundation was cracked, and I knew it. I'd spent my life building structures meant to last. The one structure that mattered had crumbled before I noticed it needed support. The office quieted as evening approached. I heard the junior partners leave first, their voices fading down the stairwell. Then the administrative staff, their keyboards falling silent, one by one. Finally, Leo's footsteps, approaching my door. He knocked, then entered without waiting for an answer. "Richard, I wanted to thank you for joining the call today. It meant a lot to the team to have you there." I looked up from the window where I'd been watching the river darken. "I'm sure it did." Leo settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where he'd sat for 7 years of mentorship meetings. But something in his posture had changed. He wasn't leaning forward, eager and attentive. He was leaning back, comfortable, assessing. "I also wanted to talk about the emeritus thing. I know it's not what you envisioned for this phase of your career, but I hope you can see it from my perspective, from the firm's perspective. Enlighten me." Leo sighed, the patient sigh of someone explaining the obvious to a stubborn elder. "The Port Authority loves your work. They've said that consistently, but they're also realistic about timelines. This project will break ground in 2 years and take another 4 to complete. That's 6 years from now. You'll be 78. I'm aware of my age, and clients get nervous about that. They worry about continuity, about having a single point of failure. By positioning me as the lead, with you as emeritus, we're telling them there's a succession plan, that the firm will survive beyond any individual." And my role in that survival? Leo met my eyes. Advisory, strategic, the big picture stuff that doesn't require day-to-day involvement. You've earned that, Richard. The freedom to step back and let the next generation carry the weight. I studied him for a long moment. "Who came up with this structure, you or the partners?" "We discussed it together as a leadership team." "And when did these discussions happen?" Leo's smile tightened. "Over the past few months, as the project scaled up, we realized we needed to formalize roles, without including me in those discussions. You were busy with other things, and honestly, we didn't want to worry you until we had a clear proposal. I nodded slowly, processing. The betrayal wasn't in the structure itself. The betrayal was in the secrecy, the planning, the presentation of a fait accompli disguised as consideration. I'd spent 40 years building a firm where decisions were made transparently, collaboratively. Leo had spent 7 years learning how to circumvent that process while appearing to honor it. I'll need to review the legal implications, I said. The partnership agreement has specific provisions about role changes for founding principals. Leo's expression flickered, just for an instant. Of course, take whatever time you need, but Richard, I hope you'll see this as what it is. An opportunity to enjoy the fruits of your labor without the stress of daily management. He stood, extended his hand. I shook it, feeling the firm grip I'd taught him, and watched him walk out of my office for what felt like the first time as something other than my student. After he left, I pulled up the project files again and started digging deeper. Not just the presentation materials, but the correspondence, the meeting notes, the email chains I'd been gradually removed from over the past year. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Leo had been meeting with the Port Authority without me for 6 months. He'd cultivated relationships with their planning department, their legal team, their executive director. He'd presented design iterations as his own, occasionally mentioning my initial concepts in passing, like footnotes in someone else's biography. And in every document where leadership was discussed, my name appeared further down the list until it disappeared entirely from the operational structure. The partners, my partners, had signed off on this. They'd attended meetings where my role was discussed and diminished, and not one of them had thought to mention it to me. I scrolled through the files until I found what I was looking for. A memo from Leo to the partners, dated 3 months ago, titled Succession Strategy, Airport Project. The language was careful, professional, devastating. As Richard approaches the later stages of his career, we must proactively manage client perceptions of leadership continuity. My recommendation is to transition Richard to an emeritus role effective at final design approval, with day-to-day project leadership consolidated under my direction. This ensures the Port Authority sees a unified, forward-looking team while honoring Richard's foundational contributions. Attached was a draft announcement for the client, praising my visionary work, while introducing Leo as the lead architect overseeing all phases of implementation. The partners had responded with variations of "makes sense" and "agreed" and "thanks for thinking ahead." Not one objection, not one question about whether I'd been consulted. I closed the files and sat in the darkening office, the city lights beginning to flicker on across the river. 40 years of work, 40 years of relationships, 40 years of pouring myself into this firm, and this was how it ended. Not with a celebration of what I'd built, but with a quiet coup disguised as succession planning. The worst part was the logic of it. Leo was right about the client concerns. He was right about the timeline. He was right about the need for continuity. The only thing he was wrong about was the assumption that I'd accept being written out of my own legacy without a fight. I pulled up the partnership agreement again and read the dissolution clause carefully. It required a formal vote of the partners to remove a principal from active management, but it also allowed any principal to trigger a review if they believed the firm was being managed in a way that violated the agreement's spirit or purpose. The airport project was the firm's largest asset. If I could show that Leo's exclusion of me was damaging the project's long-term viability, the review process would freeze all progress until resolved. The partners would have to choose between me and the project. And I knew, with the certainty of 40 years in this business, that they would choose the project, which meant they would have to find a way to keep me involved. It was a gamble, a high-stakes roll of the dice that could destroy everything I'd built. But sitting in that dark office, listening to the ghost of celebrations past echo through empty halls, I realized I'd rather see it all burn than watch Leo preside over the ashes. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. The attorney's office smelled of old books and stale coffee, exactly as it had for the 30 years I'd been coming here. Harold Finch occupied the same corner suite in the same downtown building, his name still alone on the door despite decades of practice. His files still organized in the same bewildering system that only he understood. At 81, he was one of the few people older than me who still worked full-time, and I'd always taken comfort in that shared stubbornness. Now I sat across from his cluttered desk, the airport project files spread between us, watching him read through Leo's memo with the same expression he'd worn during my divorce proceedings. "This is thorough," Harold said finally, removing his reading glasses. "Legally, it's defensible. He's not removing you from the firm. He's proposing a role change that could reasonably be presented as in the firm's best interests." But I wasn't consulted. Consultation isn't legally required for non-binding proposals. The partners discussed it among themselves. They didn't take a formal vote. No bylaws were violated. I leaned back in the chair, the leather creaking beneath me. So he wins. He gets the project, the credit, the future. I get a title and a pat on the head. Harold held up a hand. "I didn't say that. I said the proposal itself isn't illegal, but proving it requires documentation. Emails, meeting notes, witness testimony, and it requires showing damages that his actions have harmed the firm or your position within it." I thought about the months of gradual exclusion, the meetings I hadn't been invited to, the emails I'd been dropped from, the clients who now called Leo first. "I have documentation. Not everything, but enough to show a pattern." Harold nodded slowly. "Then we have options. The nuclear option is triggering the dissolution review clause. That freezes all major decisions, including the airport project, until the dispute is resolved. The Port Authority will panic. The partners will have to choose between backing you or losing the commission. And if they choose the commission, then they have to negotiate with you. Find a role that keeps you actively involved, not just emeritus window dressing. You have leverage, Richard. The question is whether you want to use it." I stared at the files spread across his desk, the evidence of Leo's quiet coup laid bare in black and white. 7 years of mentoring, 7 years of teaching him everything I knew, and this was how he repaid me. By positioning himself as my successor before I was ready to step aside. By convincing the partners that I was a liability rather than an asset. By building his future on the foundation of my work while erasing my name from the blueprint. "I want to use it," I said, "but I want to do it right. No emotional outbursts, no public accusations. Just cold legal pressure that forces them to choose." Harold smiled, the thin smile of a man who'd spent decades navigating corporate warfare. "Then we start with a letter, formal notice that you're aware of the succession discussions and concerned about potential breaches. Request for all documentation related to the airport project leadership structure. And a reminder that any major decisions, including role changes for principals, require a formal vote with full disclosure to all partners." That won't stop them. No, but it puts them on notice, and it gives us leverage if they proceed without including you. The next step depends on how they respond. I left Harold's office with a plan and a timeline. The letter would go out tomorrow, certified mail to the firm, copies to each partner personally. Leo would receive his at home, a nice touch that Harold had suggested. The element of surprise, the reminder that I wasn't as out of touch as they'd assumed. Driving back toward the office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly, something colder and more focused. The same clarity I'd felt during tough negotiations, when the other side thought they had me cornered and I found the one clause they'd overlooked. The next morning, I arrived at the office before dawn and watched the sunrise paint the river gold from my window. By 8, the first email started arriving. The partners, confused and concerned, asking for clarification. Leo, his message carefully neutral. "Richard, received your attorney's letter. Surprised by the approach. Let's talk before this escalates." I didn't respond immediately. Let him wait. Let him wonder what I knew and how I'd found out. At 9, Sarah knocked and entered with my coffee, her expression troubled. "Richard, there's a partners meeting called for 11. Leo just scheduled it. You're not on the invitation." I took the coffee calmly. "I know. I'll be there anyway." Sarah hesitated. "He might not let you in." "He doesn't have a choice. The conference room is technically part of the common space. Any partner can attend any meeting held there." Sarah nodded slowly, processing. "Is everything okay? People are talking, the letter, the timing. Everything's fine. Just a difference of opinion about the future of the firm. She didn't look convinced, but she left without pressing further. At 10:55, I walked down to the conference room and found the door closed. Through the glass, I could see Leo at the head of the table, the two junior partners flanking him, three other senior associates filling out the seats. No empty chairs, no place for me. I tried the handle, locked. Leo looked up, met my eyes through the glass, and shook his head slightly. Then he turned back to his laptop and continued the meeting as if I weren't standing there. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling the weight of that exclusion settle into my bones. Then I walked back to my office, pulled out my phone, and called Harold. "Send the next letter," I said. "Trigger the review clause. Freeze everything." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." The call ended and I sat in my office while the meeting continued behind that locked door, my firm making decisions about my future without me. By noon, the email started flying. The partners, panicked now, demanding explanations. Leo, his carefully neutral tone replaced by something sharper. "Richard, this is extreme. We need to talk before you do something irreversible." I didn't respond. Let him panic. Let him feel what I'd felt watching him present my work as his own. At 2 o'clock, the firm's general counsel called, her voice strained. "Richard, we need to discuss the review clause. This is going to freeze the airport project. The Port Authority will lose confidence. We could lose the commission entirely." "Then you should have thought of that before locking me out of meetings about my own firm." A pause. "Leo thought it would be less confrontational if you weren't there, given the circumstances. The circumstances he created. The circumstances he hid from me for months." "Tell Leo I'll consider withdrawing the review request when he explains why my name was removed from project documents and why he's been meeting with clients without my knowledge." I hung up and waited. By 5 o'clock, the office was in chaos. Associates whispering in hallways. Clients calling with questions. The Port Authority's legal team requesting clarification about the firm's leadership stability. Leo appeared in my doorway, his face pale, his composure finally cracked. "Richard, we need to end this." I looked up from my laptop. "Then let's talk, but not here. Not in this building, somewhere neutral." Leo nodded tightly. "Where?" "The coffee shop on 3rd. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Come alone." He left without another word and I watched him go, wondering if he understood what he'd set in motion. The review clause wasn't just a freeze on decisions. It was a public declaration of internal conflict, the kind of thing that made clients reconsider their commitments. The Port Authority had options. Other firms, other architects, other visions for their terminal. If they lost confidence in Marlowe and Associates, they could walk. And everything I'd built, everything Leo was trying to claim, would dissolve like morning fog. I sat in my office long after everyone else had left, the river dark below me, and wondered if I was willing to let that happen. The answer, when it came, surprised me with its clarity. I'd spent 40 years building this firm. I'd sacrificed my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, my health, my peace of mind, and Leo thought he could just step in at the end and take it all, with a smile and a title and a pat on the back. If I couldn't have the legacy I'd earned, neither could he. I'd rather see it burn than watch him profit from my ashes. The coffee shop on 3rd was empty at 7 in the morning. Just a barista wiping down counters and the smell of fresh espresso cutting through the damp Portland air. I'd chosen a table in the back, away from windows, away from casual observers. Leo arrived exactly on time, his usual confidence subdued, his eyes red-rimmed from what I assumed was a sleepless night. He ordered nothing, just slid into the chair across from me and waited. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of it. Finally, he spoke. "This doesn't have to destroy everything." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't, but that depends on you." Leo's jaw tightened. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was planning for the future, the firm's future, your future. By locking me out of meetings, by removing my name from project documents, by meeting with clients for 6 months without telling me." He started to protest, and I held up a hand. "Don't lie to me, Leo. I have the emails. I have the memos. I have the meeting notes where you discuss my emeritus role before I knew it existed. Leo stared at me for a long moment, then looked away. Okay, I handled it badly. I should have talked to you first. But the logic was sound. Clients were asking about leadership continuity. The Port Authority specifically mentioned concerns about your age. And you reassured them by presenting yourself as the lead and me as an afterthought. I presented myself as the day-to-day contact, because that's what I'll be. You can't be on site in 4 years, Richard. You can't manage construction administration for half a decade. That's just reality. I'm aware of reality. I'm not asking to be on site. I'm asking to be involved, to have my name on the work I created, to be consulted on decisions that affect my legacy. Leo leaned forward, his voice dropping. Your legacy is secure. The airport project will always be associated with Marlowe and Associates. With you. Not if my name isn't on anything. Not if the client thinks you designed the concourse I sketched on a napkin 3 years ago. Something flickered in Leo's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that I knew more than he'd assumed. What do you want, Richard? I'd thought about this question all night, weighing options, calculating outcomes. I want my name on the design documents as lead architect. I want final approval authority on all major decisions. I want a seat at every client meeting. And I want a formal agreement that my role continues until the project is complete, not until you decide I'm irrelevant. Leo's expression hardened. That's not possible. The Port Authority won't accept dual leadership. They want a single point of contact. Then make me the single point of contact. You can be my deputy, my associate, my successor in waiting, but I'm not stepping aside until I'm ready. You'll be 78 when this project finishes. I'm aware of my age. I'm also aware that my mind is sharp, my health is good, and my experience is irreplaceable. The Port Authority knows me. They trust me. They've worked with me for 20 years. You've worked with them for 6 months. Leo sat back, his face pale. This is a power play. You're trying to humiliate me in front of everyone. I'm trying to protect what I built. You tried to take it without asking. Those are different things. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of mentorship and betrayal. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice quiet. If you force this, the partners will have to choose, and they might not choose you. They might not, but if they choose you, I trigger the dissolution clause, and the airport project dies. No project, no commission, no firm. Is that what you want? Leo stared at me, and for the first time I saw something like fear behind his eyes. You'd really destroy everything? Just to prove a point? I'd really destroy everything to prevent you from taking what's mine. That's not a point. That's a boundary. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he stood abruptly. I need to talk to the partners. I'll get back to you. He walked out without looking back, leaving his coffee untouched, leaving me alone with the smell of espresso and the weight of ultimatums. I waited 3 days. 3 days of silence from the firm, broken only by Harold's updates about the legal freeze and the Port Authority's growing impatience. 3 days of watching my phone, waiting for a call that didn't come. 3 days of wondering if I'd overplayed my hand, if the partners would really choose Leo over the project, if I was willing to follow through on my threat. On the fourth day, the call came. Not from Leo, from Margaret Chen, the senior partner who'd been with the firm for 20 years. The one person I'd always trusted to be honest, even when the truth was painful. Richard, we need to meet, all of us, no attorneys, no posturing, just the partners talking honestly about the future. I agreed, and an hour later I was back in the conference room, this time with the door open and a seat waiting for me at the head of the table. Margaret sat to my right, the other partners arrayed around us. Leo was at the far end, his expression carefully neutral. Margaret spoke first. We've reviewed the situation, the documents, the meetings, the communications, and we've had some difficult conversations about how this was handled. She glanced at Leo, who didn't meet her eyes. There were mistakes made, exclusions that shouldn't have happened, decisions made without full transparency. For that, we apologize. I waited. Apologies were cheap. What mattered was what came next. Margaret continued, but we also have to face reality. The Port Authority is nervous. They've heard rumors of internal conflict, and they're considering other options. We have competitors circling, firms that would love to take over this project. If we don't present a unified leadership structure by the end of next week, we could lose everything. She looked at me directly. We need a solution that works for everyone. That preserves your legacy while giving the client confidence in long-term continuity. I leaned back, considering. I've already proposed a solution. My name as lead architect, final approval authority, client meeting participation. Leo as deputy, learning the ropes, preparing to take over when I'm ready to step aside. Leo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Margaret exchanged glances with the other partners. That's one option, but we've discussed another, a compromise that might satisfy everyone's interest without creating ongoing tension. She slid a document across the table. Co-lead architects, both names on all documents, both present at all client meetings, both with approval authority, but with a defined timeline for transition. You remain fully involved through design development and construction documentation. At groundbreaking, you transition to a consulting role with guaranteed involvement through completion. Leo takes over day-to-day management, but you retain final sign-off on all major decisions. I read through the document slowly, parsing the language. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but it was more than Leo had offered, and it kept me involved, kept my name on the work, kept me from being erased. And if I don't agree? Margaret's expression didn't change. Then we're back where we started. Legal freeze, client uncertainty, potential loss of the project. We're asking you to compromise, Richard. We're asking you to trust that your legacy is secure even if your role evolves. I looked at Leo, who finally met my eyes. Is this acceptable to you? He nodded slowly. It's acceptable. Not what I wanted, but acceptable. I studied him for a long moment, searching for the lie behind his words. But all I saw was exhaustion. The same exhaustion I felt. 7 years of mentoring, months of betrayal, days of crisis. We'd both lost something in this fight. The question was whether we could build anything from the ruins. I need time to think about it. Margaret nodded. Take tonight, but we need an answer by tomorrow morning. The Port Authority is waiting. I left the conference room without looking back, walked through the empty office to my corner window, and watched the river flow toward the sea. Somewhere out there, my daughter was living her life without me. My ex-wife had remarried years ago, a nice man who took her to galleries and didn't work weekends. My firm was fracturing from within, and the project that should have been my crowning achievement was threatening to become my epitaph. I thought about the napkin sketch still pinned above my desk, the concourse design that had come to me in a moment of inspiration 3 years ago. Leo had been there. He'd watched me draw it, ask questions about the sightlines, the flow, the integration with transit. He'd learned from that moment, absorbed it into his understanding of how I worked, and then he tried to claim it as his own. The document on the table was a compromise, but it was also a recognition. My name would stay on the work. My voice would stay in the meetings. My legacy would survive, even if my role diminished over time. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. I pulled out my phone and called Harold. Draft an acceptance, but add one condition, a formal apology from Leo in writing, acknowledging that he excluded me without justification. I want it in the file in case this happens again. Harold was quiet for a moment. That's not standard. Neither is what he did. Make it happen. The next morning, I walked into the conference room and found everyone already seated. Leo looked up as I entered, his expression guarded. Margaret gestured to the empty chair. Have you decided? I sat down and placed Harold's revised document on the table. I'll accept the co-lead structure, with one addition. I slid the document toward Leo. A written acknowledgement of what happened, not for punishment, for the record. So we all remember that transparency matters. Leo read the addition, his face pale. For a long moment, I thought he might refuse. Then he pulled out a pen and signed. Margaret signed next, then the other partners. Finally, I added my name, the document passing from hand to hand like a treaty ending a war. When it was done, Margaret looked around the table. We have a lot of work to do. The Port Authority needs reassurance, the team needs direction, and we need to present a united front. Can we do that? Nods around the table. Leo met my eyes and nodded once sharply. I nodded back. The war was over. But peace, I suspected, would be its own kind of battlefield. 2 years passed. 2 years of joint meetings, joint decisions, joint presentations. 2 years of watching Leo master the skills I'd taught him, watching him earn the respect I'd once given freely. 2 years of learning to trust again, or at least to function alongside someone who tried to erase me. The airport project moved steadily through design development, construction documentation, permitting. And on a gray morning in April, we stood together on a windswept patch of land adjacent to the existing terminal, shovels in hand, cameras flashing, politicians smiling. The groundbreaking ceremony was everything a project of this scale deserved. Tents protecting guests from the intermittent rain, a podium with microphones and the Port Authority logo, rows of folding chairs filled with officials, contractors, community leaders. I stood at the edge of the platform, watching Leo deliver remarks about the vision behind the design, the years of work that had brought us here, the future this terminal would enable. He mentioned my name 3 times, called me a mentor, a pioneer, a foundation. It was more than the contract required, more than I'd expected. When he finished, the crowd applauded, and he gestured for me to join him at the podium. I walked forward slowly, feeling the weight of 42 years compressed into that short distance. The microphone was too high, adjusted for Leo's height, and I had to pull it down. A small thing, but symbolic. I was still adjusting things in this project, still making accommodations for a body that no longer moved the way it once had. I've been designing buildings for longer than most of you have been alive, I began, and the crowd laughed appreciatively. And I can say with complete confidence that this terminal, this project, this team, is the finest work I've ever been part of. Not because of any single design element or construction technique, because of the people who brought it to life, the people in this room, the people who will build it, the people who will use it for generations to come. I paused, looking out at the faces. Leo stood at the edge of the platform, his expression unreadable. Architecture is often described as frozen music, but I think it's more than that. It's frozen time, frozen memory, frozen hope. Every building we create carries forward the moment of its creation, the hopes of its creators, the needs of its community. This terminal will carry forward all of us. Long after we're gone, it will stand here, connecting people to places, possibilities, each other. That's the legacy that matters, not names on documents, not titles on org charts, but the work itself standing against time. I stepped back from the podium to polite applause, and the ceremony moved on to the obligatory photo opportunities, hard hats and shovels and muddy ground. I posed with the governor, the mayor, the port director. I posed with Leo, our arms around each other's shoulders, smiles fixed for the cameras. And when it was over, I stood alone at the edge of the site, watching the heavy equipment lined up like sleeping giants, waiting to begin. Leo approached, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one, and I took it. "That was a good speech," he said. "You meant it?" I considered the question. "Most of it. The part about legacy being the work itself. That's true. The part about this being the finest work I have ever been part of. Also true. The part about the team, including you. That's complicated." Leo nodded, accepting the complexity. "I've thought a lot about what happened, about how I handled it. I was so focused on the future, on what I thought the firm needed, that I forgot about the person who made it possible. I'm sorry, not because the contract requires it, because I should have been better." I studied him for a long moment, looking for the performance behind the words. But all I saw was a young man who'd made terrible choices and was trying to understand why. Apology accepted, but trust takes longer. I know. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. I sipped the coffee, watching the equipment. "You'll have that chance, every day for the next 4 years. Use it well." Leo nodded and walked back toward the tents, leaving me alone with the wind and the rain and the future rising from the mud. The ceremony ended. The tents came down, the officials departed. I drove back to the office through streets that I'd traveled thousands of times, past buildings I'd designed and buildings I'd admired, and buildings I'd never noticed until someone pointed out their flaws. The river accompanied me part of the way, gray and patient, flowing toward the sea as it had for millennia. At the office, everything was quiet. Most of the staff had taken the afternoon off, celebrating the groundbreaking in their own ways. I climbed the stairs slowly, my knees complaining, and settled into my chair with a view of the river. The napkin sketch was still pinned above my desk, yellowed now, the pencil lines faded. But the idea remained clear, the concourse that would channel thousands of travelers through spaces designed for wonder rather than efficiency. It would exist soon, not just on paper, but in steel and glass and concrete. People would walk through it, sit in it, remember it. And somewhere in the back of their experience, my name would linger. Not prominently, not obtrusively, but present, like a signature in the corner of a painting. I pulled out my phone and called Elena. She answered on the second ring, surprising me. Dad, everything okay? Everything's fine. The groundbreaking was today. I just wanted to tell someone. A pause. That's great, Dad. I saw the coverage online. The terminal looks incredible. You saw the coverage? I've been following it. Proud of you. I closed my eyes, feeling something shift in my chest. Thank you. That means more than you know. Another pause, longer this time. Dad, I've been thinking, maybe I could come visit sometime. See the site, see you. I'd like that. Okay, I'll figure out dates. Talk soon? Soon. The call ended and I sat in the quiet office, the river flowing below, the future rising beyond the window. Not everything was healed. Not everything could be. But something had shifted. Something had opened. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building towards something worth having. 4 years later, I stood in the completed terminal, surrounded by light and space and the hum of distant conversations. The concourse curved gracefully overhead, steel and glass configured exactly as I'd sketched on that napkin so long ago. Travelers moved through it with the casual indifference of people who didn't know they were walking through someone's dream. But I knew, and Leo knew, and the partners knew. That was enough. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was larger than the groundbreaking, more polished, more permanent. Dignitaries gathered on a temporary stage near the main entrance. Media cameras positioned for the perfect shot. Airport staff in crisp uniforms directing traffic and answering questions. I stood near the back, watching Leo prepare for his remarks, watching the crowd settle into their seats. At 81, I no longer sought the spotlight. My role in this project had evolved exactly as the agreement specified. Through design development and construction documentation, I'd been fully involved. At groundbreaking, I transitioned to consulting status, reviewing decisions, offering guidance, watching Leo grow into the leader I'd always known he could be. It hadn't been easy. There were disagreements, tensions, moments when I wanted to grab the reins and pull everything back toward my vision. But I'd held back, let him learn from mistakes, watched him develop the judgment that only experience could provide. And somewhere along the way, something shifted between us. Not quite trust, not quite friendship, something closer to mutual respect, earned through years of working side by side toward a common goal. Leo approached, looking crisp in a dark suit, his hair silvered now at the temples. Ready for this? I asked. He smiled, the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times, but softer now, less performative. Ready,